Welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I'm Devi Ward Erickson, and I invite you to join me every week for another enriching and powerful conversation about the intersection of sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. Each episode of Sex is Medicine is dedicated to awakening your heart and mind to the true purpose and power of human sexuality. Please join me on this journey of self-discovery as we explore the art of using pleasure as medicine to awaken, heal, and empower every area of your life. Sex is Medicine broadcasts every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network. You can listen to the replay and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And now get ready for another episode of Sex is Medicine. Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am Devi Ward Erickson, your host here for another exciting adventure where we discuss sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. I am so excited to have our guest here this evening, Amagine, formerly known as Amy Jo Goddard, the artist. Imagine. Okay, I don't have to Frenchify it then. I'm like,
I know the French do always make things sound better. It's true.
But the artist formerly known as Amy Jo Goddard, and so I'm so delighted to have you. Because I have a confession to make. When I first started podcasting, I think in 2013, I so wanted to have you on the show, and I was always too afraid to reach out because I'm a little bit shy. So it's like fulfilling my dream. 7 years.
That's hilarious! Oh my god!
Yay! So it's so awesome to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Of course. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I love what you're doing.
So you're like a legend in the field of pleasure-based sex education. So many, many years ago, you've been teaching for decades and decades. How did you get started in this? Where did all this begin?
It began with my teenage years. That's where it began. I think like many sex educators, I don't know if all of us, but yeah, it began with just total confusion, no resources, going through all the hard things the hardest way possible, having sex earlier than I really needed to be, sexual assault, unplanned pregnancies, pregnancy scares, identity, all of it. And, when I finally got my own sex education, I went to 3 different high schools. I got 0. 3 different high schools, none. So I really was starting at ground zero when I went to college, and then finally got amazing sex education. And I just remember feeling like happy about it and excited and empowered by it. And then also kind of pissed off, why did I have to wait this long? This would have helped me so much 5 years ago or more. So, as I became a feminist activist, that became a really, really important part of what I was up to in the world, and finding my voice and wanting to make the world better for women in particular. I just finally put those pieces together. This was the doorway. This has been the doorway for me. I knew what it had done for me. And so then this was, the early 90s. So it was like, well, how do you do that? Or where do you study that? Or what, and I knew I wanted to be, like quote unquote, like legitimate in terms of, I wanted people to take it seriously. And people cracked jokes all the time, and they'd be like, oh, when I was, kind of on my way to New York to go to grad school, and study human sexuality education, there was always the tongue-in-cheek jokes, and people just thought they were being so cute. And that just sort of reiterated why I wanted to go to school for it. Just because I loved learning. I love learning. I wanted to be in school. I wanted to do a graduate degree, but it felt like, especially in this field, I wanted people to take it seriously because I knew how important it was. So
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a long, windy road to kind of figure it all out. There was no internet then. So
Right, well, that's what people forget. Like, we're Gen Xers. Like,
yes.
we grew up without, there was no internet before
Right.
we created it, right? Our generation created it. And yeah, it's like you actually had to go to an encyclopedia.
Right. I went to a library. Remember those?
Oh my God. The Dewey Decimal System and all that stuff.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm glad I have those skills, but yeah. So, I mean, it just really came from such a personal place, and then just really became my mission in the world, that as many people as I could touch and help, not go through what I went through. I wanted to do that. So we still have a lot of work to do. So, still.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's why we train other people. And I remember having a similar response when I first had my first experiences of multiple orgasms through tantric sexual healing. And I was like, I was delighted for myself, but I was furious that it took 33 years of my life before I had this experience that was inherent within me. That was my birthright. And nobody even ever told me that it was possible. And so I too went on a mission. I was like, well, oh my God, if this is our potential as human beings, then why are we not being informed about this early on?
Which is a very good question, actually. Why not?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure we have our theories, particularly being feminists, right? There's a lot of reasons that we're not informed. And I love your email signature that in your emails, it says, let me pull it up here for us.
Yeah.
So I say it correctly. The more whole we are as sexual beings, the more fulfilled we are as human beings. I know that to be true. Yeah. But where did that come from for you?
It came from knowing that sexuality is that important, and watching, really what I think I do in my work is help people really access their full power. It's broader. And I think, people will come to me for like a sexual issue, like that's what brings them often in the door. And then they're often surprised at how whole person it is, how holistic it is, how it affects everything else. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's, really watching the women in particular, which is a lot of what I've worked with over the years, watching them really come into their power and seeing how it's just not possible without your sexuality. Right. You can't tuck it away over there in the corner and say, oh, we're just not going to touch that part. We're not going to deal with it. We're not going to talk about it. And then expect that you're really going to be able to stand wholly in who you are. And of course, it's such a huge part of our fulfillment, and it's a part of our fulfillment that is so hard to talk about for a lot of people. It's getting better because more of us are talking about it and having the conversations, but it's still really hard. I think by and large, for most kind of regular folks that don't surround themselves with, sex toys and sex educators and workshops and, the kinds of things that we do, I think it's still really challenging. And so to not address the inherent importance of this thing that we all came from, right? Like it birthed all of us. And however your conception happened, however you came into the world, it doesn't matter. Like you came from that energy. We all came from that energy. So there's no way that isn't an inherent important part of who we are. I think it's really the core of who we are. And so if we diminish that, and if we don't, really allow ourselves to embrace the full nature of that part of ourselves. And that doesn't mean that you have to have sex with people even, it's really about who you are. Then we're missing a big piece of who we are and of our lives.
I love that. And I often get asked about our views on asexuality. And so from my point of view, it's not about what our sexuality looks like externally. Right. It's about how we relate to our sexuality internally. And is that a conscious active choice that we're making with ourselves and our body on an ongoing basis? And then it really doesn't matter what it looks like to other people. It's how it feels and lives inside of us. What are your views on asexuality?
I mean, I think we're still learning a lot about it. I think, it's important that there's asexual communities that are really claiming like, no, this is a real identity. This is really who we are. And you get to not diminish it. And I think, sometimes, especially people in our field can swing the other way where it's like sex positive, sex everything, say yes to all the things,
That's and if you're not, then there's something wrong.
Yeah, that's not what sex positive is, yeah, I think that just because someone's asexual, meaning they don't really have sexual attraction to other people, that's not something they're seeking in life. Although many asexual people still want companionship, they still want to have relationships. There's not like a sexual charge or that real sexual drive for them, but it doesn't mean they don't have a sexuality within themselves. That is a piece of what their sexuality is. It just looks different. Yes. And it doesn't mean they can't have pleasure in themselves. It doesn't mean that orgasm wouldn't feel good or self-pleasuring wouldn't feel good, or that that maybe they are into ecosexuality. Maybe they like to make love to the wind, or whatever. I think it just gets to look different for different people, and we get to open up our ideas about that. Yeah. We're so judgmental about sex as a culture,
exactly.
In so many ways. It's like all the little boxes of what you get to do and don't get to do and who you're supposed to be attracted to and what kind of relationships. And the rules are endless. Yeah. So I just say, screw all the rules, like you do you and really do you. And get to know, like get to have like that depth of relationship with your own body and your own pleasure and, your own like wide range of erotic feeling, right? That's something that's very different than I want to have sex with that person over there who I think is hot. And that's great too. That gets to be a part of it too. But I think too many people think that's what sexuality is. And I think it's all that other stuff. It starts here in who we are. And then if we choose to share it with someone else, great.
Yeah, I think I love that you shared that, because the way the normal view of sexuality in our culture is they have it asked backwards, right? It's really, there's so much emphasis on what it looks like with the other person and how it feels for the other person and all this attention on the other person, and really taking away the focus of what's going on in my body, what are my emotions, what are these sensations, what are the signals, and then also even when it comes to, like self-pleasure, how particularly as people with vulvas and vaginas, we're so conditioned away from touching ourselves. Right. Giving ourselves pleasure in that way. I often tell the story of how when I first started training in tantra and I was handed this like G-spot wand and I was like terrified to put it in my vagina. I was like, my vagina is for my boyfriends. I can't pleasure my own vagina. That's not acceptable. I can pleasure my clitoris, but my vagina is for my male partner, right? So
that's deep. That's deep that you internalize that. You internalize that. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I find that working with other vulva owners, that's so common, is this, how we've compartmentalized and pieced our pleasure is so compartmentalized and what we're allowed to have and what our partners are allowed to have. And then also, again, just the self-connection and self-pleasure and touching ourselves and masturbating, how that's so secretive and hush-hush, and how we're so like conditioned away from that self-exploration. And yet how that is the very foundation of how we're going to be able to have fulfilling relationships, sexual connections with other people, is our ability to dive deeply into ourselves and really attune to our own bodies.
Yeah. And it's such a huge piece of, like to just like bring it into like the macro, right? It's like, that's the micro, and the macro that's how they keep us in line.
Yeah.
That's one of the many ways. But, if you really look at like the history of patriarchy and like how patriarchy has been created and upheld, such a huge pillar of that has been to, suppress, repress, and abuse, basically, female sexuality. And, whether it's burning witches or, demonizing women for adultery or, there's the list is very, very long all over the world. When you look at the way women are constantly disenfranchised, or vulva owners are constantly disenfranchised from our sexuality and our sexual power, because they know how big that is. And that, I mean, we're that's frightening if we are in our power, right? If we are in our power, then the world gets to look really different.
Yes.
And so I think as more of us are doing that, and again, that's why I think it's so important. Like, this is not small potatoes. This is the powers that be, so to speak. They know that. And they've known this for a long time. And this is why they have, put so much energy into creating laws that tell us how to reproduce and how we can't reproduce, and abortion and not abortion. I mean, there were times when abortion was really supported, and then they were like, oh no, if we say no to it, actually that's a better way to control them. It's whatever works for, really maintaining those power structures. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah. Pleasure is political. It is a political act.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, I'm a very anti-infant male circumcision advocate. And one of the social scientists that we had on the show, we discussed how social scientists have found that the societies with the highest prevalence of circumcision are also the societies that tend to be the most violent. And they found a direct correlation between sexual suppression and sexual oppression and cultural violence, and particularly cultures that suppress female sexuality tend to also be the most violent and abusive.
Yep.
I thought that was very interesting from, again, that macro. Like, we know it, but it's wonderful.
Right.
The numbers and the science backs it up, right?
No surprise there.
Yes.
Surprise there. Yeah. I mean, and when you think about something like circumcision, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole with this, so, I'll bring it back. But, when you think about like what we are doing to people, it's like, as soon as you've come into the world, one of the very first things we're going to do is, without your consent, remove one of the most sensitive parts of your body. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to tell you that this is okay, and tell your parents that this is the way to do this, because, like stupid reasons, really, like, because we can't teach them how to properly clean under a foreskin or whatever, But I mean, when you really think about the harm that does to an entire society, right? And the harm that that's done to cis men, people who have come in with penises, to have that done to you the first time. I mean, I don't know how we would ever prove that relates to violence, but I don't see how it can't. How could that not? They
have proven that it definitely damages areas of the brain that play a part in emotional regulation and violence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So this is why we have jobs.
Right.
This is why we do what we do, to end sexual violence and all of its manifestations and to cultivate pleasure. So let's talk about what you do, your Firewoman retreats. Which came first, the book Firewoman or the retreats Firewoman?
Oh, the book. Yeah, the book. Well, the book is Women on Fire. Yes. 9 elements to wake up your erotic energy, personal power, and sexual intelligence. Done under my former name. So funny to change your name when like your name is out in the world as an author or whatever. Hey, Prince did it. I can do it.
You can do it. The artist formerly known as.
There was a copyright thing. I couldn't call events Women on Fire. So the events are Firewoman.
Wow. Because of your name change or because of just the copyright with the book?
No, someone else owns the copyright for events, so I couldn't do it.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I went right out on my book tour. I found out right away. I got a cease and desist. And,
oh, no. Yeah. Okay.
Like,
well,
I'm like, we both are here to empower women. Like, let's have a conversation about this. But there was no conversation to be had. So I was like, all right, I'll just change it. Anyway, that's sometimes how these things go. But yeah, Firewoman, it's I've been doing these retreats for the last 5 years. Started them kind of like, about a year or so, a couple years after the book came out. It really was like, it was the event of my dreams where I could bring all the elements together that I had, and I had done them in parts in many of my sexual empowerment programs over the years. And I just finally wanted to offer a bigger event where, it was a combination of, deep experiential learning, sacred play, and then like, sacred theater and, healing work and ritual and, all of those elements that are just really important to me and are such important pieces of my work. I wanted to really bring those together. So the production level is really high when we do this in person, especially. But yeah, I think this may be my last one. This may be my last one that we're about to do. So because I'm shifting and a lot of my work is shifting and how I do the work is shifting. My film is coming out this year. And so a lot of my attention is turning to my film, At Your Cervix. So I'm excited to have you for this one. You're going to come and teach. It's been so fun for me to collaborate with different teachers and bring more, people that are kind of focused on different aspects of the work in. And what I have found this year and doing these virtually, I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily chosen to do this particular event virtually, even though I've been teaching virtually for years and I teach people how to teach virtually. I was really blown away the last couple of Firewoman retreats we've done this year at the level of intimacy and connection that we have really been able to create. I think so much more is possible than, even someone like me that like already gets online teaching. That wasn't like, I wasn't new to that game this year. Even for me, I was like, oh my God, yes, we are able to do this at this level. So that's been a real delight, I think. And then getting to reach people in different parts of the world. I mean, I have had people fly in from other parts of the world for Firewoman, but that's fewer and far between. So having the opportunity to have a lot of people in different parts of the world attend has been really beautiful. And also to have, neurodiverse people attend. I've had people tell me, oh my God, I never would have come to this in person, but now that you're doing it online, I'll come, and, as an, ENFP on the Myers-Briggs, like, I don't think about that. I'm a much more extroverted person and those kinds of scenarios excite me. So I forget that for many people, that's just way too big of a risk. So it's been really exciting to see how the work has gotten to blossom in a different way this year.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I think that's one of the things that maybe many of us are experiencing with working online is really that what is being transmitted or what is being exchanged is energy.
Yes.
Right. And yes, the way we're designed as humans is for that face-to-face, body-to-body kind of transmission. And yet when we're talking in the field of energy, there's no distance and there's no time.
Yes.
Right? So we're actually getting a visceral experience of what that is. Yeah. Really exciting.
Yeah. And just like, building community gets to look different. I mean, I think we've all figured that out this year. Well, maybe not everyone, but I think like for those of us that have explored more of what's possible with online community, I mean, yes, it's different and it can be really amazing, So we have a beautiful community of people that come into this work. I think, and you probably see this in your work too, right? It's not like the typical path or the typical event that people attend. And so I think the people who do show up, there really tends to be a real deep seeking. Yes. And they're just like interesting people that are doing creative, deeply spiritual things sometimes in their lives. Lots of healers, lots of social workers and therapists, and who are coming to like really like drink from the well and be nourished for themselves. And it's really such a gift.
And I love that so many people are becoming more aware of that integral role that sexuality plays in being a whole human being, as you say in your byline. Like, but that therapists and counselors, it's like the awareness that I can't be a full support for my clients in this area if I'm not a full support for myself, if I haven't fully supported myself. So that desire to grow and awaken and heal and expand our capacity, I love that showing up broad spectrum across all these different fields of expertise. Yeah. And I love one of the points of resonance that I found with you really early on was right after you published your Woman on Fire book. And we were both at the Sex Down South, the first one they ever did.
The first one. It was so good.
We were both keynotes for that, or presenters for that. And the way you talk about sexual energy is fire energy. And in our tradition of Tantra, the sex chakra is fire element energy, and sexual energy is understood to be fire. And that's very unusual in other schools of Tantra because they use a different chakra system. So I loved that point of connection that we both really relate to sexual energy. The way it lives inside of us is through this charge of fire, this electric, vital energy. Yeah.
Part of my spiritual path has been I've been on the Lakota path for my adult life, and I've been a fire keeper in the Inipi in the Sweat Lodge for 20 years. And so working with and I wrote a little bit about that in the fire chapter, but working with the fire and what you learn from working with fire and the element of fire, which is very, very different from anything else on the planet, is very, very powerful. And, I'm sure somehow it was anchored in there, at some point years ago, and eventually that I would write this book. So, it's always interesting to see in the different traditions, how the elements are organized, the meaning, and nothing is right or wrong. It's just different ways of looking at it.
Different ways. Yeah, I'm studying Tibetan medicine now, and they have air in the genitals instead of fire. And every time I try
interesting.
That's
really different, actually. But of course, you need air for fire.
Air fans the flames, right? Yes. But it's like how I'm thinking, like how you harness that. It's like there's nothing to grab onto.
Right.
So it is interesting.
More often I hear water, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which is cooling, right? And the system water is very cooling. So anyway, so fire and sexual energy. So Firewoman retreat. When's this thing happening? When are we playing?
Oh my gosh, mid-May. What is the weekend? It is May. So here's what we do for this. So the retreat is 3 days from the 14th through the 16th, but we also do an opening ceremony that we invite everyone to on the 13th. So the Thursday before that afternoon, we do an opening ceremony that has been really potent the last 2 times we've done it. And you don't need a ticket for that. You just sign up to come. And so for people that are like on the fence and they're like, I don't know, is this my vibe or not? It's an opportunity for people to come and kind of dip a toe in. And then, we definitely get sort of people signing up in that last 24 hours, after they've kind of experienced a little bit. So some people do that. Obviously we want to have everyone come for the whole weekend. It's so juicy and yummy. We're going to do an erotic temple this time. We've been doing the erotic carnival for years at Firewoman Retreat. And this time we're calling it the erotic temple because our theme, which is why I so wanted to have you, our theme for this one is spiritual transformation, sexual initiation, and power. So really bringing together that sexual and spiritual pieces, which are so integral, so integrated. Again, I think this is a place where we've just been so misled culturally by many cultures, many religions, that have denigrated sexuality or talked about desire as something bad, or, all the many ways that we've, again, been disenfranchised from that part. And it's like, what's more spiritual than living in your full, whole self, right? I mean, if we are here as humans in this life, then doesn't it make sense that to, as deeply as possible, understand our humanity and what we are capable of as humans would be a spiritual journey.
What do you think? Yeah. If you're not invested in keeping the patriarch in power, then absolutely yes.
Well, that's one of the other pillars of patriarchy is religion, right? Patriarchal religion. And so, it's, using religious symbols to keep people in line, rather than help us to open. And, so I think it's always important to be critical of that. I've worked with so many people over the years that have been really, really harmed by their religious upbringing, by religious ideas. And, it's not to say that every religion is a problem. There's good things in every religion. I've got my own interesting mishmash of a history with different spiritual traditions. But it's really painful what has happened to so many people. Certainly we know for gay people, religion has often not been kind. There's that piece, but so I think really helping people to integrate that and feel the wholeness of that, and that to fully embrace your sexuality doesn't mean you need to say goodbye to your spiritual path or somehow turn your back on, or even turn your back on your own religion. I mean, I think we get to have our religion if we have one, and that doesn't mean we agree with everything that's in it. It doesn't mean we cease to be, a critical thinker about what works for us and what doesn't, and to really maintain our own sets of values. So I've just seen so much of that. I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah. And I really I've explored this quite a bit, because our specific tradition of Tantra was founded by a woman, Naguma, and she very specifically gave sexual teachings, according to my understanding. Obviously, I wasn't there, but what I've been able to glean from the writings and read between the lines. And she very specifically did not want her sexual teachings encoded into a monastic tradition. So she set very specific guidelines to ensure the authenticity of them as they came down through the ages. And so it's unique in the world of Tibetan Buddhism, because there is a lot of patriarchy in Tibetan Buddhism, and there is a lot of denial and aversion to the totality of our humanity, specifically our sexuality. And so much of Tibetan Buddhism, as it's come to the West, has been conveyed through monks who quite literally can't shake my hand because I have a vulva, which is I just don't understand how you can be enlightened and not be able to shake another human being's hand because of what their genital anatomy. That's the most insane thing to me. And so we get quite a bit of flack for what we're doing and daring to say that it's lineage based, and we're just doing it anyway because we're telling the truth. But one of the things that we examine regularly is that split between sexuality and humanity, and specifically sexuality and our divinity. Yes. And what I've discovered through my yoga and my practice is that the more human I become, the more divine I am. The more clear, the more pure, the more open, the more connected. All of these qualities that we associate with an enlightenment are really just who and what we are when we are fully healed human beings, when we are de-traumatized human beings. Yeah. And our sexuality is an integral and key component to that. And you literally, as you said, we literally cannot be fully human and be divorced from any aspect of what it is to be a human being, particularly and especially our sexuality. And then in our tradition, it's taught that every orgasm is literally a glimpse of enlightenment, not pie in the sky, not in an imagination, but because of the way the pranas move through the energy body, when we have an orgasm, that experience of bliss is actually a glimpse of our enlightened nature. And the more we can anchor our awareness in the bliss of orgasm, the more healthy, divine, functional, whatever we become as human beings. So that connection between sexuality and our wholeness is literally hardwired into the blueprint of what it is to be a human.
Oh, I love how you put that. So beautiful. Yeah. And I mean, I just got this image too, as you were talking about it in this way of, an orgasm is a release, right? But there's also the possibility that we can release the crap we've been carrying, like send it out with the orgasm, let it go. There's lots of ways to heal, and there's lots of ways to release. And it's such a powerful way to do that. And this idea that to be spiritual is to transcend the body. I call bullshit on this.
That's the patriarchy. That exactly. Is totally the patriarchy.
Yes. No, the body is not meant to be transcended. It is meant to be understood, deeply loved, embraced, wholeness, all of that, that is, as you said, right? That's what then lifts us into that place of our own divinity. Divinity is the other side of humanity. Sexuality, physicality, right? Other side of spirituality, yes. Right? The form and the non-form. Mm-hmm. So it's all part of the same. And, you know, even when you look at, you know, many spiritual traditions and religious traditions, if you see people speaking in tongues, or you see people having an ecstatic religious experience, what is that? Oh gosh, it looks a lot like sexuality. It looks a lot
like orgasm, ecstasy, right?
Right, yeah. Exactly. And, you know, because it has a different name, it gets accepted in those environments. And, you know, sex has so many different meanings, you know, and I think this is another place that people really get to explore in themselves of like, what does sex really mean for me? Mm-hmm. You know, I've talked with people, you know, of all different genders who say, you know, sex is just like an act. It's just like a thing that's fun. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like, and no judgment on that. That's great. It can just be fun. Right. For other people, it's like, it's a source of meaningful connection that I want to have. Okay. So for some people, it means connection. And then if they're not having that connection in their relationship, they start to feel disconnected and they start to get off kilter. Right. And so there's a different meaning there. You know, for other people, it's like, it's stress release, you know, right. Or for other people, it's a spiritual experience. It's sacred, you know, and none of it is wrong. Mm-hmm. And we also can have sex, you know, within one person, within one human that means those different things on different days and different scenarios with different partners. And, you know, I think we want to simplify it in a way that it's something that's just, it's not that simple. No. It can be, we can have it be simple, but it's also this really complex, beautiful, unfolding part of who we are that continues to unfold throughout our lives if we let it.
And can't be contained necessarily, right? Or I would say causes, yeah, exactly. It's not meant to be, especially if we think of it as fire, mm-hmm. right? Burning, flame, energy, moving.
Yeah. Well, and that's why when you look at something like, you know, the level of sexual abuse amongst Catholic priests who have been told, they've been told to contain it, right?
Yes.
They've been told, repress this part of yourself. You don't get to express this. You don't get to have this. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it's going to leak out in unhealthy ways. Of course it will. Mm-hmm. Because it's energy. Energy wants to move. Mm-hmm. Energy creates more energy, right? And so the more repression we put on it, the more intensity we put on, like, I can't do that, and that's bad, then the more energy and momentum behind it as it leaks out, and the more dangerous that can be for us and for others.
One of my students did this analogy of like, it's like the way we in the Western society approach sexuality or live with our sexuality is like, it's this beach ball that you're trying to keep under the water. And the more pressure you put on it, the more it wants to push back until eventually, boom, you can't hold it down anymore. But the amount of energy that it takes, repressing and repressing and repressing, and then that's normal. And then we wonder why we have illnesses and diseases and dysfunctions and all that sort of stuff. It's because repressing that type of energy is going to cause illness. It just absolutely results in that.
Yeah. I mean, truly, if we had we'll dream, we'll envision what we want, right? In this world, we had a world where everyone had a healthy expression of sexuality, a healed sexuality. I believe we would have a world without violence, without war, without gender repression. Like there wouldn't be a need for any of that.
And we have we have a template for it with our bonobo monkey friends.
Oh, yes.
Right? How they resolve conflict through oral sex. I'm like, my husband's like, all right, we're fighting. Let's resolve this conflict.
Do you want to fight?
Yeah, exactly. And apparently, if I just learned this the other day, I can't remember who told me this, but apparently the way they create genetic diversity is they send females out to different tribes to intermate with the males from different tribes. Before the female is allowed into the tribe, she's taken away with all the other female tribe members, and she has to satisfy them sexually. She's the satisfactory pleasure every single one of the tribe's females before she's allowed to have sex with the males.
They're like, all right, you'll do. Okay, cool.
Just lining up. They're like, all right, bring it.
They're onto something there.
I think they might
satisfy the women first and all will be well.
I think that's a tantric principle.
Yeah. Some people have figured that out. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think a lot of people are really walking around with so much heaviness around sex. It's like, oh, there's something really wrong with me. It's not working right. There's something intrinsically flawed or inadequate in myself.
Yep.
And sex gets to be fun. We get to lighten up about it. We get to have more fun with it. We get to just realize that we just all have gaps in our education. I mean, I'm still learning all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning in this conversation, I mean, I have, studied sex for a living and taught it for a living. And I'm still always learning. Like there's always so much more we get to uncover if we allow ourselves to, and to not be in the ego expectations of I'm just supposed to know, that's when I've seen a lot too, is like, oh, well, now that I'm an adult or now that I'm married, I should just know. And so then I'm afraid to ask about anything because I feel like I'm already supposed to know it. And it's like, how would you know?
Exactly. When did we get the download? Like when you turn 18, it's like your brain opens up to cosmic sex education.
I mean, it's like when you turn 18 and you leave home is when you're like starting your bigger unlearning, and then the reprogramming gets to happen. For a lot of us, I mean, there's always something that we're reprogramming. So, yeah, I mean, I just think we put so much pressure on ourselves. Yeah. And, I think we get to give it different contexts and different meanings and play in it and not be afraid of erotic energy and not be afraid of the power of pleasure. The way that someone who is having an ecstatic religious experience isn't afraid of that because they're connected to the divine. Like we get to do that.
I love that. And I love that your retreats are providing an opportunity for us to do that, to explore in a safe way and explore all these little different areas and all these different realms to play, right?
Yeah. Do you want to share what you're going to teach?
Host? So, Yeah. So speaking of fire, I'm going to share the Tibetan Tantric Fire Element Meditation that began my journey. I was introduced to this 13 years ago and changed the course of my life. I encountered my dharmic path through sex. Through this particular meditation, working with sexual energy, working with the sex chakra specifically. So I will be sharing that. And then we're also going to explore erotic energy through the pleasure of movement and dance. So we're going to do the 5 elements of tantric dance and and erotic dance and play with movement and using movement to activate our sexual energy, activate our erotic energy, move it throughout the body, feel what it's like to have that vibrant and alive, and then share it with each other on screen. That's going to be fun. Shoot fireballs to each other.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, it's another good example of how much, so many folks are afraid to just let themselves dance and be in their bodies and be free in movement. What that opens up for us is so important and so big. I mean, I love the yoga revolution that's been happening, because it helps get people in their bodies, and yet I've talked to so many, like yogis who are admittedly disconnected from their sexuality, right? So
well, again, when you
get to keep deepening. What's that?
Yeah, well, and that's because a lot of the hatha yoga practices they do teach avoidance of sexuality. So yes, it's about embodied and mindfulness, but again, it's only within this framework. It's within this approved framework, and there's a denial and aversion of the inclusion of sexual energy. And yet, sexual energy, as we've discussed, I mean, it infuses every aspect of our life. So to be able to incorporate that yogically with our practice is part of what we're going to be doing with the movement in the presentation I'm going to be giving.
I love it. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Our last live Firewoman retreat. Well, this is live too. It's just different. IRL, live IRL, I guess. The theme was de-armoring and rewilding, and I think like that rewilding process, that's always a part of what I do anyway. It's whether it's the theme or not, but that's such a big piece of it. It's like allowing ourselves to be in our own wildness. Like my experience is that is really what people want. And I think particularly cis women who have been really trained to be a certain contained human in the world, and to not have that freedom. I feel like there's such a hunger for our own wildness, and to be able to experience our wildness in a way that feels like I'm not going to be attacked for it, or I'm going to be safe enough to be able to fully express it. It often comes back to that safety piece, why we don't allow ourselves to go there. So I love, what gets to happen when people really allow themselves to move in their bodies. I think like that longing is really there. So.
And that is again, that's divinity, right? Yeah. The uncensored, authentic, unfettered expression of our soul is God. That's God.
And that's why so many goddesses also represent that part, yes, whether we're talking about like Kali, which is like destructor goddess, like, or whether we're talking about, Diana, Artemis, like queen of the wild things, goddess of the wild, like that's always been a piece. But again, it's like we've just gotten it tamed down, tamped down so that we could get in line. And more and more people are saying, you know what? I want more than that. I want to live differently. And I think we're trying to figure out what that gets to look like. And there's been so much reckoning with how we're living this past year. I'm seeing people just choosing to live in different ways, selling all their things and traveling, or getting a tiny house and living more simply, but being out more surrounded with nature, or, just really making different choices. I think we're in a time where we get to make different choices.
And I also find it very salient that this movement of awakening and reclamation is being led by women.
Of course. Yeah. Of course we're leading the way, right? We have the most to gain in many ways, but really we all have a lot to gain. We all do, and I think that's the thing about patriarchy and these power structures is that it hurts everyone, except for maybe like a small 1% of people that, are holding the purse strings and, kind of accumulating power hoarding power over others. I think besides them, it really, it harms everyone, and I think really at the core, it's harming them too, because it's as much as many of those kinds of folks will use religion to their benefit, there's a real deep disconnect there.
Absolutely. I mean, to have like how distorted must your soul be? Yeah. To want to to abuse people that way. Yeah. And this ultimately, this journey is about the reclamation of our humanity, regardless, right? Of we have between our legs. It's how we reclaim our humanity. Yeah. So is Firewoman Retreat, is this just for cis women, or is this for all women?
This is for all women identified people and non-binary identified people who were identified female at birth are all welcome. So anyone in that end of gender spectrum is welcome. We always have some non-binary folks in the room, which is important to me. Yeah. And that's probably why I may not keep doing Firewoman as it has been. As a queer person and someone that really cares about queer community, I always want to create opportunities for queer community, and woman to me always includes trans women and women all along that spectrum. It's not for me to police someone's gender and how they get to identify in that way. Yeah. So I am very excited about it. I think that like the depth, of this topic is profound, and I'm really looking forward to having that experience with people and seeing who decides to show up for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe in the future they can be fire human retreats.
Yes. Doesn't have quite the same ring, but we'll figure it out.
Right on. So how can people find out more? So we will be sending out stuff from our website, but if people want to go directly to you, where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to learn about Firewoman Retreat, that's firewomanretreat.com. Really easy. Yeah. We are in the process of changing over my brand. So depending when people are listening to this, right now it is still at amyjogoddard.com, but it will be moving over to imagination.com soon. Imagination.
I love it. Imagination. Yeah. I love that.
So I mean, I'm on the socials, sometimes. No, I'm easy to find. I'm Sexual Empowerment on Instagram. And then Amy Jo Goddard on Twitter and Facebook, at least for now, until I can get everything changed. It's a process to change your name. So,
but firewoman.com,
firewomanretreat.com.
Okay, awesome. Wonderful. And then again, of course, listeners, you can always, because I'm going to be teaching, honored to be teaching your potentially last one. You can find out more at authentictantra.com. It was so great. Yeah, it was so great to finally connect with you after 13 years. Well, maybe I've been on air for 7 years. So it's 7
I know. It's like I've been seeing you at events and, and like, yeah, so good to finally get to collaborate. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for saying yes.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all you are in the world, of course.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in once again to another episode of Sex is Medicine and joining us. And I do hope you will join us for this Firewoman retreat coming up next month, starting May 13th with our awesome opening circle. We will be sending out promos. You can register for those at authentictantra.com or firewomanretreat.com. Have a beautiful evening, and we will see you next week. You've been listening to Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward Erickson, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. You can listen to and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Just search Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward. Stay connected with me and my guests on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Authentic Tantra, and learn how you can use Tantra as medicine to heal, awaken, and empower every area of your life at authentictantra.com. Make sure to tune in to Sex is Medicine every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network, and join our watch party every Thursday evening on Facebook at Authentic Tantra. We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward.